Real background, he was born in Macon, Georgia, where his immigrant parents were the only Chinese people in town. They lived there, had a laundry business there up into the early 1950s, and then they moved to San Francisco. Got his BA degree from UC Berkeley, and then his PhD from Northwestern. And he spent 40 years as a professor of experimental psychology at Cal State Long Beach and York University in Toronto. He retired in 2007. And so that's a bit of his personal background. But he's moved on to write books, many books. Chopsticks in the Land of Cotton, Lives of Mississippi Chinese, Sweet and Sour Life in Chinese Family Restaurants, Chinese Laundries, Tickets to Survival on Gold Mountain, Southern Fried Rice, Life in the Chinese Laundry in the Deep South, and other books, including the one here, the cover page there, A Chinese American Odyssey, where he talks about his story of how he became from a retired psychologist to being a historian. So I'd like to welcome our speaker, who's going to talk about how I discovered and came to value Chinese American history, Dr. JUNG. Welcome.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting to find out about the birth certificates. I appreciate that. When I was growing up in Macon, Georgia, I really had no awareness or any interest in anything about history. Not only Chinese history, even American history. I was just a kid growing up in an old small town. People have always asked me after I moved to California. So, because you're Chinese, and Chinese receive a lot of prejudice, and you're in the Deep South. There's all that segregation. It must have been really, difficult. And I kind of think to myself, yeah, maybe, I don't know. I just never thought about it. I just was like a kid growing up. And the funny thing was that because we were the only Chinese in town, we didn't really, in many ways, encounter as much prejudice as Chinese in, say, places like Los Angeles or San Francisco. So over the years, I would just listen to these people say, wow, that must be really interesting. And I'd say, oh yeah, okay, and then I'd forget about it. So finally, well not finally, but eventually when I retired from academia, I started thinking, maybe these people were right. Maybe there was something interesting about growing up in the Deep South, being the only Chinese in town. So that's when I kind of thought, well, maybe I could write a book about it, but I really wasn't sure, because it wasn't something I was familiar with or trained in. But I thought, well, maybe I'll give it a shot. So I had written books in psychology, so I didn't have any problems writing. I had the organizational skills, I had the research skills and so forth. But in terms of trying to write a memoir about growing up in the South, this was something that was a real challenge and something I didn't really feel comfortable with. So I kind of waxed and waned, and I thought about it, and thought maybe I shouldn't do it. And then, I thought, well, writing a book takes some time and effort. Maybe I should just go retire and enjoy myself. Go and spend all this time trying to write something that I don't even know if anyone's going to be interested in it. So, the skill, the subject matter may not have that much potential. And so eventually I ended up writing this book that after some struggling, came up with the title Southern Fried Rice, which turned out to be very ingenious in a way, because Southern Fried, anytime you hear Southern Fried, especially in the South, you immediately get people's attention, because life in the South is a Southern Fried experience. So finally, one year when I was in Atlanta, I think, I took my wife on a detour to Macon, which was about an hour and a half drive south of Atlanta. Macon's in the middle of the state. And so we went there, and she wanted to see, the building which housed the laundry where I grew up. So that was kind of like a moment of truth, because I went there and I discovered that the laundry, which is in the middle of the colored part, had been completely torn down. And what you're seeing is this church. I'm standing in front of a parking lot. That's behind where the laundry was. And so it sort of made me, I don't say angry, but I sort of felt violated. Here's a building where I grew up. It was not the most luxurious place, but it was home sweet home, And they tore this thing down. And it's as if we had never been there. So I said to myself, well, I'm going to try to write this book to at least, give some documentation that there was once a family there, of a Chinese family running laundry. Later, as I started my research, I discovered that as early as 1884, that picture is actually 1906, that there have been family laundry there in the building next to the hotel, the one with the 3 windows up on the 2nd floor. If you see which one I'm talking about, I don't have a pointer. But I could see what it was like in 1954 and what it was like in 1906. And looking at city directories, I found that the name Family Laundry appeared as early as 1884, which to me was quite remarkable. And growing up in Macon, I never knew this. I never thought to ask my parents. I don't know if they even knew or even cared. But now that everything was gone, and I started to wonder, well, how did these Chinese get there in 1884? What was their connection to my family? Did my family know about any of this? What was life like for these Chinese in 1884? Between 1884 and probably, say, the late 20s, there were at least about 20 Chinese, not all at the same time, but over those years, who ran 3 or 4 different laundries in Macon. So that was something that I needed to investigate. Now, some of you may have heard of the historian Judy Young, who is the preeminent scholar on the history of Chinese American women. And I had met her before at some conference, and she had encouraged me to do some talk at a conference. So I knew her very casually. So one day I get an email from Judy Young, and I do a double take. Why am I getting an email from Judy Young? So she basically said, I'm going to Georgia, in a few weeks to give some talks about Chinese American women's history. And while I'm there, is there anything of interest about Chinese American history that you recommend that I go visit? So my answer was basically no. Oh, by the way, and I thought about this very long and hard. Was this sort of rude, kind of imposition? So I thought, well, what the hell, So I said, by the way, I am writing a memoir about, our life in Georgia. And I'd be happy to send you a copy. And Judy, if you know her, being the ever gracious and sweet, wonderful person, she wrote back basically, sure, send it, but I'm very busy, which she is, and I don't know when I'll get to read it. So roughly 3 weeks later, I get this reply from Judy. I've never seen anything like your memoir. And so I thought to myself, is that good or bad? So, is the glass half empty or is it half full? So I elected to think, well, maybe that was a good comment. And the reason I thought it was kind of a good comment was she gave me 74 suggestions. Now I thought, it must be pretty bad. But maybe it's salvageable. She gave me 74 suggestions. And she read it with a fine-tooth comb because some of you who are dedicated historians will know that when the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed in 1943, they allowed 105 Chinese. That was almost like an insult. They said, okay, we repealed that law, and now 105 Chinese worldwide can come into the U.S. You might as well have not given any, 105. But anyway, when I had sent in my draft, I think I had made a transposition, maybe I had put down 150 or something. And one of her comments was, oh, the number was 105. So I said, hey, my memoir has some possibilities. So from then, I had some amazing luck and opportunities. For example, once you write a book, what do you do with it? Well, you got to find a way to market it. You got to find a way to sell it. I had no skills to do this. I didn't know that there would be that much interest in it anyway. I did it more as a, something I felt I needed to do emotionally, kind of thing. So I approached the Chinese Historical Society in San Francisco because I grew up in that neighborhood. I knew the building. I knew they had a little small entryway where they had some books for sale. So my suggestion was, I will offer them some books on consignment and see if they will at least let me display them on their bookshelf. And I was fortunate that the person in charge at the time said, oh, well, why don't you just come up and do a book reading? Well, that was more than I could hope for. I mean, I wasn't even trying to do that. So here I am in San Francisco at the Chinese Historical Site doing my very first book reading. I had never done a book reading before, and to be honest, I had never even been to a book reading. So I didn't even know what to do. So, and I don't tend to like to read to people anyway. I think it's kind of boring. So I sort of just extemporaneized, I guess is the word, kind of, freelanced it. And every once in a while I'd read a page just in case someone wanted to know if it was, readable. So that was kind of what got me started on it. And then there was a conference of the Asian American Studies, which is a professional organization. These are all bona fide dyed-in-the-wool historians. I was not in that category. I was like an amateur, and I was really kind of, threatened, or maybe frightened, I guess is the right word, to go down there and talk to these historians about my little adventures in Macon. But I went down there, and among other things, when I went down there, several interesting things happened. A whole contingent from Augusta, Georgia, Chinese showed up. Augusta, Georgia was like about 130 miles from Atlanta, but they all drove over because they wanted to hear about Macon. And this was kind of meaningful to me also because they invited me to go to Augusta to the CCBA there and talk about my book about Macon. And my father, when he had first come over to the United States, had spent 3 years in Augusta because he had a grand uncle there. And just to make a point, one of the things I discovered that I didn't completely understand, but it made a lot of sense later, is while he was in Augusta, he bought a partnership in a business. He paid $500 to become a partner in some business, which was all totally fake. It was just like a way to get back in the country. Because then, when he came back, he could say he was a merchant. So if he hadn't done that, if he'd gone back to China as he did to get married and an arranged marriage in 1928, he wouldn't have been able to get back in the country because he would have been considered a laborer. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Another thing that happened when I went to Atlanta is that the local Atlanta OCA, Organization of Chinese Americans, they all came too. They came and supported me, and they had asked in advance that if I would give a talk that night after my talk at the Asian American Studies, well, that I would come to OCA and give a talk at their facility. And so that was a really scary event because there was some misunderstanding between the restaurant and the organizers as to how many people were going to come. So they had ordered like dinner for 50 people, but the restaurant thought it was 15. So we go there at 6 to set up because the dinner is not till 7 or something. And I can hear all this cussing and swearing in the kitchen. And my Chinese is fair, but I couldn't quite understand what they were saying. But I knew it was not a happy scene, And there was a lot of swearing, really vocal. And so somehow they managed to put this thing together, that dinner was delayed. And so my stomach was really churning, not because I was hungry, but because my time was being used up. Now it was getting to 8, now it was 8:30, and maybe 8, 9, So I'm thinking to myself, okay, I cannot give an hour's talk after people have waited this long for their dinner. They're not going to put up with that. So while I'm eating, I'm trying to digest my dinner, I'm condensing my talk to 15 minutes. And so I figured I got to cut my losses, all right? So when the dinner's over and I get up and I give my little short talk, okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions? 45 minutes later, they're still asking questions. And that was fortuitous outcome because, number one, it really gave me a lot of confidence that I could handle something really terrible. And it also, it wasn't like a planned, rehearsed, canned talk. It was sort of like handle the questions, ad lib, make a few jokes, or whatever. And so it was like a baptism of fire, you know, for a live audience. And so I really felt good about that. And then what happened is Sachi Koto, I don't know if you remember her, she was one of the first Asian American anchors on major television on CNN. She's in the middle of the frame next to me. She came up to me and asked me if I would give the keynote address at the Who's Who in Asian Americans in Georgia, which I never heard of this organization. Yeah, who are these people? So I thought, geez, I only met her like 5 minutes ago, and she's asking me to give a keynote address. Are you sure you know? I said, I'll have to think about it. I mean, I was kind of tempted, but on the other hand, I was thinking, I don't know. She said, oh, there'll be 300 people, and you can sell a lot of books. And then I thought, oh, well, maybe I will come here. So I said, I'll let you know later. So then I go home, back to California, and she calls me like 3 days later and said, have you decided yet? And you really want you to give the keynote address. And she says, it's a black tie event. I said, well, what's a black tie event? I was very naive. She said, oh, will you wear a tuxedo? Oh, I said, oh, forget it. I don't have a tuxedo. I was trying to get out of it. So she said, oh, don't worry. We'll rent you one. Okay. So I said, so what my thinking was, I didn't ask for this. She asked me. If it's bombs, it's her fault. I'm not taking responsibility for this. So she says, okay, come, okay. So I said, well, I don't know how many books to write, you know, because I was really naive, you know, beginning to do this. So well, there's going to be 300 people, you know, a lot of them couples, so they're all in one book. So bring 150 books. So she said, bring 150 books, so I shipped 150 books. Well, people are paying $100 a plate for dinner. Afterwards, 300 people mill out into the lobby, and they can't see anything beyond themselves. As I'm sitting at this little table, there's a couple other people trying to sell books. I think we sold maybe 10 books. And I'm like, talk about sinking feeling. This is worse than that dinner at OCA. So I said, what? I got 140 books here, and I'm going to have to cart these things back on the plane? Are you kidding me? Oh, what a disaster. I said, boy, what a stupid thing I did. Well, fortunately, Sachi, you know, took them to her house since she's storing them in her garage. And I can come and get them the next time I'm in Atlanta. So I said, okay, yeah, I do come through Atlanta once in a while. And as it turned out, over the next 2 or 3 years, I actually liquidated all those books, believe it or not. But that was really traumatic. So there we are with the who's who people, all lined up, these 50 distinguished Georgians, judges, lawyers, businessmen, scholars, you know, entrepreneurs and everything. And it was, you know, kind of a strange event, but, you know, I had a good time. So similarly, I had approached Museum of Chinese in America in Chinatown, New York. And same thing, would you be willing to take some books on consignment? Because I didn't think any of them would buy the books because they didn't sell, they'd be stuck with them. So I figured, you know, if it's on consignment, what do you got to lose, right? So I was again fortunate in that the guy in charge of acquisitions at Museum of Chinese in America, he said, well, why don't you just come and give a talk, you know? He said he's really interested in this. So there I get to go to New York. I was going there anyway, so I coordinated it with some other event that was of a family nature. And so I got to give a talk in a tiny little room, if you've ever been in the museum in New York. It's an historic old school building. And so that again was another fortunate thing that kind of got me launched. And I started seeing, hey, this is fun, you know, I'm enjoying this. So I had many other opportunities. I just mentioned a couple, like I got to go back to Georgia a couple of times to be on literary panels. They wanted to get authors who wrote about Macon or who were from Macon. And so that was very rewarding. Like, hometown boy comes back and makes good, you know, that I get to come back and tell these people in Macon about the history of Chinese in their town. Now, getting back to this question about like what it was like to grow up in Macon, that was, you know, this is before mass media, television. What was my main imagery about Chinese was mainly comic books. And my favorite comic, one of my favorite comic books other than Batman and Superman was Black Hawk. Black Hawk was a bunch of like Magnificent Seven, you know, were like 7 international from people from different countries, and they sort of fought evil. And they had a sidekick named Chop Chop. And while all the Aryans had guns and airplanes that they could fly, Chop Chop fought the evil dudes with his meat cleaver. And he didn't fly his own plane. He sat in the jump seat of Black Hawk's thing. And I did, you know, I kind of felt that I didn't really like Chop Chop a lot, and you know, so he used to comic relief. But he was the only Chinese image I ever saw growing up. I didn't go to the movies that much. We didn't have Fu Manchu. I didn't get to see Charlie Chan or anything like that. So maybe I was lucky. That was the extent to which I knew about Chinese. I learned from my parents, you know, how to speak some Chinese as a, you know, child, because they didn't speak English particularly well. And so I didn't really hate being Chinese, but I didn't enjoy being Chinese. I didn't really know what it meant growing up as, you know, in the only Chinese family in town. In 1943, actually, Macon had a very significant historical event of Chinese American history. That was during the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Madam Chiang Kai-shek came to Macon. And so you might wonder, why did she come to Macon? But my sisters and my brother, 4 of us were hauled out from the laundry as a photo op. My parents didn't go, they were working, but they somehow wanted us to be there to see Madam Chiang. My older sister said we never came within 100 yards of her, but they put her picture in the paper and said, "Big day for tiny JUNGs. They get to meet their heroine." Now, it's kind of interesting that after you know, I started writing my book, with the help of archivists, we found this old newspaper article from 1910. Chinese girl refused to the white school. That Chinese girl was Mei Ling Soon, the maiden name of Madam Chiang Kai-shek. So 1910, she can't come to the school. 33 years later, they give her an honorary doctorate. So, you know, history is kind of full of twists and turns. Another thing I discovered long after I left Macon, with the help of my friend Scott Seligman, who's written a number of great books about Chinese American history, there was a murder. This little clipping is from the Macon newspaper about Chinese arguing about something in the laundry. And when I read it, it said just near the Lanier House. That was the Lanier Hotel. Well, then that inescapably meant that that laundry was the laundry that I grew up in. So that one of the previous owners of the laundry that my parents later would acquire was murdered right there. And I don't know that my parents ever knew about it. I never knew about it, fortunately. But it, you know, that might explain why there were ghosts haunting around the place. But the newspaper article kind of like made light of some of this. It talked about the Chinese chicken gizzards were plentiful, and a big shot Chinese from Chicago, because he was related to the Chinese laundryman that was killed, came down to offer a reward for capturing or identifying the murderer. Now, more pleasant note, after I finished writing my book on Southern Fried Rice, one day I get a series of emails from a person with a name that's very similar to mine, James JUNG. He was a chemist professor in North Carolina. And he, I don't know if you can read it, I'll just big apprentice. So he sends me this email. He said someone told him that he should read this book, Southern Fried Rice. So he says, it makes me sound like you were writing my own story. And he talks about how they were the only Chinese in Kannapolis, North Carolina, a small cotton mill town and textile. And so his father was an immigrant. They ran a laundry, and so he was quite excited about this. And then he sent me like another email. He says, "Oh, he missed his lunch. He was reading his book so much, so he just finished his book." And at certain points, I just had to stop and laugh. Saying, "What? You too?" I felt like I should highlight and add marginal notes to your book. So then he sends emails to his brothers and tells them they've got to read this book. That, this is just like our life in Kannapolis. So this was very interesting to me because, when I wrote my book, I had no idea how many Chinese laundries there were all over the United States. I had no idea what the life was like for people growing laundry. So to get this detailed feedback from at least one person was validating. Told me that my experience was very similar to a lot of other people who grew up in Chinese laundries, second generation. So he writes to his brothers, he says, I finished reading this book, it was GREAT, blah, blah, blah. And he said, they lived above their laundry, and they had 3 windows, just like us, looking out. So, anyway, lately I've been doing more research on Macon, and I found out that there were all these laundries in Macon that I referred to before. So by the time I done all this, I kind of realized that there was more to write about. I mean, I had started out writing this memoir, and so I thought, I need a prequel, because I was starting to learn that there were not only Chinese laundries all over small towns in the South, but all over the United States. Every state virtually, maybe except Mississippi, had Chinese laundries. I say except Mississippi, I'll get to that in a moment. One thing I also learned was that my family tree, in a way, also was very heavily invested in Chinese laundries in the South, in Chattanooga, which is where my father first went when he first came to the United States in 1921 before he went to Augusta. And so my great-great-grandfather had 3 grandsons who came to the United States, and they settled mostly in Chattanooga, Birmingham, and Augusta. And some of their descendants had laundries like in Atlanta, or my father in Macon. And so that was the extent to which I did family genealogy. My work has been more on trying to look at the history and the experiences of the Chinese immigrants and their families and running small family-run businesses in the United States. So one day, actually at the Chinese Historical Society meeting at Castelar School, I was giving a talk about Southern fried rice, and this man, Roland Chow, whom I'm pictured with, he's in the back of the room, and he said, yeah, I really enjoyed your talk, and by the way, do you know anything about Mississippian Chinese? Mississippi Chinese? And I said, well, in college I knew one girl who came from Mississippi, but he said, you really should write a book about Chinese in Mississippi. And I thought to myself, as I was probably rolling my eyes, but it's like, that's not how you write a book, it's like, it just tells us a subject there. But he said, I got all these relatives, my aunt, Carolyn Chan, who was eventually president of OCA and CACA, rather. He gave me her phone number and a bunch of other people. So I talked to a bunch of people, and I did a lot of research and thinking about it 3 or 4 months. I thought, yeah, this is really fascinating. This is really interesting because Mississippi is a totally different kind of place for Chinese. Virtually all Chinese in Mississippi, which, by the way, had the largest number of Chinese probably from like 1900 to probably 1930 in the South, or maybe 1940. They virtually all ran small grocery stores, like mom and pop convenience stores, family run. All the kids who grew up worked in the store. They all have very strong emotional, psychological ties to their heritage, and it was a sort of a decaying society because everyone was growing up. The older generation was retiring. All the kids who had gone to college, gotten professional degrees, got jobs working in other places because there weren't that many job opportunities in Mississippi. So all the future generations were moving to Houston, San Francisco, LA, other places. And so I was lucky in that I happened to be connected with this history just at a critical time when there was still a lot of people who were interested in talking about it. And so to make a long story short, I ended up writing this book, which I've changed the cover recently, but Chopsticks in the Land of Cotton. And so these people worked in the stores, they lived in the stores, or they lived behind the stores, they improvised. They were very religious people, very conservative, but very family-oriented. And as time has gone by, you can see in these two images comparing 1940s and 2008 when I went down once to interview some people. You can see how two of the buildings still stand. They're in bad shape. They're about to fall apart. They're unoccupied. Probably one of them should be preserved as a historical monument. But in any case, that's what got me into an area that I would have never written a book about. But I found it was a very challenging thing because I was dealing with people who are still alive. And when you write about people who are still alive, you have to be a little bit careful about what you say. They didn't want to say anything about prejudice. They didn't want to say anything about black-white relations. They were very sensitive about this. So I had to walk a fine line on this because there were certain things I felt I needed to say or talk about. But at the same time, I knew that if I said certain things, they would think I had betrayed them or had stabbed them in the back. So it was a very delicate thing. When I was writing about people who were dead and gone, I could say anything I wanted to. So I created a website for them that goes beyond the book. Interestingly, there have been a lot of people who now really kind of, from the Delta, who resurrected their interest because it's sort of like a multiplier effect. Once you get a critical mass of people reminiscing, then everybody else wants to reminisce. When I was doing my book, I tried to get photographs from families and nobody would give them to me. It was like pulling teeth and I didn't know who to reach. And once I started this website, once one family posted about 20 pictures of their family, suddenly there was an onslaught. There were 10 other families who wanted to get their family pictures posted. So, that's how it goes. You need to get a jump start. So that was the Facebook page that I created for them. Now, aside from people's family pictures being put up, one of the real exciting things that happened was one day I look on Facebook and I see this woman who lived in the Delta, Linda Gatewood Bassey. She posts this picture and says, "Can anyone identify the number 3 and number 4 girls on the left that I've circled down the bottom in red?" Well, when I saw that, I said to myself, "Eureka! We found something of great value, of historic value. These are the Lum sisters who were denied admission to the white school in Rosedale, Mississippi in 1923. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Mississippi in 1927, saying Chinese are not Caucasians and they cannot go to the white school." And what happened in Mississippi is church schools. The Baptists opened church schools to help educate the Chinese children. And there's been a book called Water Breaking Boulders, which came out a couple of years ago, which documents it wonderfully by Adrienne Berard about that famous case. I also get periodic questions to help people find people. I sometimes succeed, I sometimes don't. For example, I had one family desperately looking for some relatives, and turned out I discovered their relatives came in through Seattle, and they had been looking all this time in San Bruno. So you got to look in the right place if you want to find people. But it turns out that a huge percentage, maybe all the Chinese who came into Mississippi, came in through Seattle. probably because one generation tells the next generation, which way to go. And so that's why there's that connection. But here's a woman who was trying to find out something about some relative who had worked in one of these Chinese grocery stores in the Delta. And while we didn't find it, it was still interesting that, Facebook reached out with that kind of connection. Now, once this interest started, New York Dance Company, the H.T. Chin and dancers, got really intrigued about Chinese in the South, not just in the Mississippi Delta. And so they put together a production called South of Gold Mountain, which I've seen about 3 or 4 times, which is very moving modern dance. In fact, I even got to be on the stage. So that was their gratitude for me for helping them do some of the background work. So, having done that, I thought, well, I don't know any other books to write. I've shot my wad. So one day I was up in Northridge to give a talk, and some guy comes up to me and says, okay, you've done this already, so now you must write a book about Chinese restaurants. And I thought to myself, as I rolled my eyes again, that's not how it works. What do I know about Chinese restaurants? I mean, I can, maybe barely read the menu if it's in English. So I'm not about to go around and write a book about Chinese restaurants. But he did plant the seed, He said, oh, he helped me and this, that, and the other. Eventually, I declined his offer. I don't like to work with other people because I'm just that kind of person. But he got me interested. I did some research and I thought, yeah, this would be worth doing, I'm not talking about banquet hall restaurants. I'm talking about small mom and pop family run restaurants where the children are helping out, much to their unhappiness. In fact, actually, a lot of these funny things happen, so I'll throw in this event. That 5 years later after I actually published that book, someone came up to me and said, hey, that guy who told you to write the book about Chinese restaurants? He learned how to run his restaurant from my father. And also, once I was giving a talk in Cerritos, and I was talking about the Gangwon, those 2 little girls, especially the Martha one who got kicked out of the white school. She said, oh, that was my aunt. And she said that during the Q&A, and it was just sort of out of the blue, and it didn't quite register on me immediately, and so I didn't say, well, what's your name, what's your phone number, I need to interview you. And then afterwards, over, I said, oh my God, I was so shocked that someone from that family was in attendance. I didn't even know they were still alive. So it turned out maybe a month or 2 later, I ran into her at another event, so I had a second chance. So I grabbed her and said, okay, I need to talk to you about this. Okay, so getting back to the restaurant story, I found some images that try to reproduce the fit and feel of maybe classic old 1920s, 1930s Chinese restaurants. These were actually not actual restaurants. They were art installations. A young Chinese-Canadian artist, Karen Tam, had created these and installed them in a museum in Winnipeg somewhere, or Manitoba. And so I was so excited to see these, that I immediately decided to send off an email saying, I really like your work, I just ran across your installations. And so I get an email back almost instantaneously. Thanks for the compliment. By the way, I am in the kitchen of your niece at this very moment. And I thought, huh? I had to double take and look at this. I said, oh, and I had a cousin whose daughter had gone to art school with Karen in Chicago. And they were both, at that particular moment, visiting each other in Amy's kitchen in Syracuse, New York. And that's the reason she's saying, I'm in the kitchen of your niece at this very moment. But talk about instantaneous feedback. I say, hey, I like your stuff. And then she says, oh, hey, somebody likes my stuff. And then Amy comes over and looks, oh, that's my uncle. So, I mean, really, bizarre. All kinds of bizarre things like that happen. Kind of rewarding. And so I used those images to create the cover for the Sweet and Sour Life in Chinese Family Restaurants. which Karen Tam also wrote about her family's Chinese restaurant in Montreal, Quebec. And as I did all this research for the Chinese restaurants, I would read about in Canada, all across the Canadian prairies, virtually every little town, no matter how small, it had a Chinese cafe. Now they didn't serve like an extensive Chinese or authentic Chinese food. They mostly had, chop suey, chow mein, egg rolls, and hamburgers, chicken fried steak, and all that. But there was still a Chinese restaurant insofar as it was run by Chinese. And as I kept reading about that, suddenly one day I said to myself, my mom used to get a Christmas card every year from Saskatchewan, North Quay, Saskatchewan. And I never met them, I never knew them, my mother never talked much about them, I never asked her about them. I said, well, what were they doing in North Quay, Saskatchewan? Well, they said all the Chinese are running restaurants, so maybe they were running a restaurant. And so I tried to track them down, and I succeeded. At first I called North Quay, and that restaurant had been closed. They said, oh, they moved to some other little town, so I moved to some little town. And they wouldn't talk to me, they were suspicious. So my Chinese wasn't very good, so I said, okay, I'm going to try to speak Chinese. So once I started trying to speak a little Chinese, they started answering me. And then, make a long story short, after about 5 or 6 phone calls, I finally tracked down some relatives who were living in Vancouver. So they invited me to come to dinner with them the next time I was in Vancouver. So that's the reason of this family reunion of people I'd never met before, and it was just all through this chance guess, So that was kind of an exciting personal story. So a lot of other things, too numerous to mention, but it kind of shows you how rewarding and exciting some of this can be. Sometimes it's kind of drudgery and kind of long, but every once in a while something really exciting kind of happens. So you can't read this, but you can see the 2 pictures of the laundry up at the top and me in front of the laundry at the bottom. So what happened was, in the 1950s or something, a friend of mine that I grew up with in San Francisco, Donald Marr, he had a friend, a Caucasian friend, who came from North Carolina, and they had worked together in the summer in some fishery in Seattle. They came down to San Francisco where I was living, and we all went to Chinatown for dim sum. Well, I had no recollection of this at all. And then so some 50 years later, I get this communication from both of them saying, oh, we had gotten together, and so the guy in North Carolina who was a prominent TV, had a talk show and everything, so he called me and interviewed me on the radio about what life was like for Chinese in the South, and so he wrote an article about it. So that was just something, again, that's like totally out of the blue. Some of these other totally out of the blue, okay. Leland Wong, I guess it's not too uncommon a name. I don't know how many Leland Wongs were named after Leland Stanford, but Leland Stanford really didn't like Chinese, but anyway. So Leland Wong in San Francisco, who was a dedicated artist and very well known in San Francisco, but he barely, survives economically. So he's a friend of mine, and one day I was actually about to go to San Francisco for the weekend or something, and I get a call from my sister saying, there's some guy who said that you have a picture of his father in your book, and he wants to talk to you. Oh, so I said, oh, really? And this is not the first time. I had several other people accusing me of having their relatives in my book, was guilty as charged, but in any case. So I said, oh, fine, okay, we'll get together. Okay. So he comes over, went too fast. So that's the other Leland Wong. And so he's looking through the book with my sister, and we're sharing notes. And at that point, we don't know there are 2 Leland Wongs. And then somewhere along the line, he sees I have a Leland Wong t-shirt about Chinatown. So he says, how do you know Leland Wong? And so it turns out that these 2 Leland Wongs both have accounts at Bank of America, and they get their checks mixed up and everything. So it was kind of funny. So anyway, so this Leland Wong, his father was actually like my father's cousin, and his father had been in Chattanooga and then moved to San Francisco. Turned out that my father and his father both ended up on the same street in San Francisco, a small world kind of thing. So anyway, he tells me that in the 60s, he decides to take a road trip. He wants to see America. He wants to see the South. So he drives across the South and takes photographs. So then he shows me this photograph, and he said, I said, I don't know who these people are. So I said to him, well, actually, that's my cousin Henry on the left, my Uncle Joe and his wife, Dave Wu on the right in Atlanta in front of their house. So, it's just uncanny, like he's running around taking all these pictures and he doesn't know who they are. And it turns out I know who they are. And then through him, I end up actually finding a picture of his grandfather through some of his other relatives. He's the one who sponsored my father when he first came to Chattanooga in 1921. So that was very emotionally satisfying for me. So there were just a lot of other strange things that just happened that I couldn't have predicted, but it's sort of like once you get some momentum going, people find out something that they're interested in that you're doing. So RTHK, which is a major television network in China, did 5 documentaries, 5-hour-long documentaries in 2012. They wanted to come and interview me about Chinese laundries and restaurants and stuff. So to make a long story short, I was able to take them to probably one of the most unusual archives of Chinese American laundries in West LA. It's just below the VA. And I went and met the owner and the son. He has like 5 or 6 rooms. It's like a maze, you go through one room, you go through another. And these Chinese, like other Chinese, don't throw away anything. Everything is there from 1910, I think. It's just an amazing place. Each room is a treasure. And he's got a lot of certificates and diplomas of all his grandchildren who all got college degrees and everything. He's got a lot of old equipment, and it was a real pleasure to go there. Then RTHK wanted me to go back to Macon. I said, what for? He said, oh, we want to take a picture of you in front of your old laundry. I said, well, number one, the laundry doesn't exist anymore. And I don't have the time to fly all the way to Macon, Georgia for a 5-minute picture and then fly back. You guys have just got a lot of money. So I absolutely refused to go back to Macon. But they said, oh, can we interview you about restaurants the next week? I said, no, you can't because I'm going to be in Portland giving a talk. They said, oh, well, can we come to Portland and interview you? Okay. I said, well, sure, fine, yeah. So that worked out real well because we got to include some very good speakers from Portland to be part of the film. So then, as if that wasn't enough, one day I get an email from some woman who's doing a documentary about black washerwomen, and they want to interview me. And I said, I don't know anything about black washerwomen. They said, oh, well, you know a lot about laundries. We don't know about laundries and everything. I mean, doing laundry is like a major chore, and no matter who does it, we want to know about it. And we're doing black washerwomen, but we want to have the context of people doing laundry all over the place. So I said, okay, finally. And then they said, we'll come out to you. And I thought it was going to be a phone interview. And turned out they actually showed up with a film crew. They had, like in the top toward the right-hand side, they had 3-man film crew come set up for an hour. And then the interviewee in the picture on the right was Grammy-nominated 6-time jazz singer Nina Freeline, who came. And so I still don't know why they wanted to interview me, but it was fun. It's like by then, I learned to expect the unexpected. They said they want to come all the way from North Carolina to interview me for an hour. Okay, you got the money, I got the time. So finally, by this time, I was seeing so many interesting things that had happened over like a decade of, trying to write these different books and everything. So I thought, well, it might be an interesting project to try to document all this, to encapsulate all these things that can happen not to brag, but to sort of say to someone who's wondering, well, I wonder what would happen to our older buck. Well, you can't tell what's going to happen. I mean, that's certainly true for me. 9 out of 10 of the things that happened with me were totally unplanned. So one day I get an email from South African Solveig Bang, who was living in India. She's now living in Cambridge, England. But anyway, she had been interested in Chinese language. I'm not entirely sure why, but she had worked for the South Coast Morning Post newspaper, and she had a lot of technical skills. And she just offered out of the blue that she would do a book cover for me for free, pro bono. So I thought, well, I need to write a book, take advantage of this. So she took my picture from standing in front of the laundry and then transformed it into the cover, which was quite astonishing. It was very flattering to have that gift of generosity. So I learned a lot of different things from this. I learned for one thing that if you're going to write a book, the only way you can sell it is to just get out there and plug it. I mean, it was kind of difficult to do before, because when I was in academia and wrote books for textbooks, I didn't have to promote them at all, publish them and all that. I just had to sit around and wait for them to sell them. But with books like this, how do you get people to know about it? So I started creating websites for each book, one for the laundries, one for the Mississippi Delta, one for the restaurant book, and one for the Chinese American Odyssey. And then I'm not doing as many of these now. I enjoy doing them, but meeting people is really a great satisfaction, because I learn a lot of stories about Chinese American experience that I find more fascinating than mine. I think I told some of these people, you need to write a book about this. It's better than Southern Fried Rice. It's more meat on it. But so I go around and give these talks whenever I get a chance, and so I've been fortunate to have given over 100 talks now. I couldn't believe it when I thought about it, but it just happens. And so, are there any conclusions I can sort of reach? Well, maybe not one in so many, but I did find, I think, that there's still a strong sentiment, maybe not as strong as it used to be, or now it's resurfacing, that Chinese are forever foreign, and there are these images from before about kicking the Chinese out, and that famous image from the Olympics of, was it 1980s sometimes, when Michelle Kwan didn't win first place. The headline said, "American beats out Kwan." So if you read the semantics of that, Michelle Kwan was born in Torrance, California. I think that's an American. So I really feel that one of my missions or goals of what I've been doing is to try to help future generations know more about the history of Chinese America. I had this opportunity or challenge. I was in Memphis giving a talk, and when I got there, the person in charge said, "Oh, by the way, we have a 5th grade class at the university. Could you go and talk to them about Chinese in America?" And I thought, are you kidding? I don't know how to talk to 5th graders. You're probably smarter than I am, right? So she actually told me that like 2 days before I went, I needed to make that correction. So I actually decided to do it. That's my title page, what you should know about the Chinese America that your history book left out. And that's been a theme of a lot of my more recent presentations. It went over very well. And the reason I know this is that I talked a bit about the Angel Island poems that were found carved on the walls. And at the end of the talk, one little kid raises his hand and says, "Where can I find those poems?" And I said, success, at least for one kid. Then this was an interesting experience. A 4th grade class, actually somewhere in Southern California, wrote to me for permission to use images from my father's documentation file, which are part of the image on the bottom left. They put together a rewritten version of the very popular Uptown Funk They revised it to Asian Am Funk. I can't play it for you. You can probably find it on YouTube. It's very well done. So what I kind of learned when I talk to older Chinese, which have been predominantly my audiences at early talks, and I felt really good because they felt said so many positive things. And then one day I thought to myself, oh, who am I kidding? I have not taught those people anything they don't already know. Like when I go to a group, half the people there are from a restaurant or family laundry. And so, what have I told them that they don't know? And then I guess my psychology kicked in and I said, oh, it's validation. They have never heard anyone say anything positive about their experiences. And the fact that I was writing about them gave them some sense of validation, if not pride. And someone was learning about what they went through and what they had to overcome. So that was good. And I was really happy to get some positive responses from younger Chinese because a lot of my earlier audiences didn't get too many young people coming. I was at one event and some woman bought all 5 books that I had and said, sign them to my children. I want my children to read all these. I said, okay, you can have these books, but do not ask your children to read them. That would be a mistake. I said, take these books, put them in a corner and say, whatever you do, don't touch my books. You know, a little psychology applied there. And then recently I've been trying to reach out beyond Chinese audiences. I was really gratified down in Laguna Woods. I was able to give a talk to over 100, maybe 200 retirees in Leisure World. I guess it's called Leisure World. Something similar to it. And they found it very interesting because they had never heard these stories. They didn't know anything about this. And so they were very appreciative of it. And I get these other experiences from African American woman, for example, trying to find her Chinese grandfather. We couldn't find it, but she vicariously could extrapolate from some of the things that I talked about. So, turns out one talk I went to, she said, what's your Chinese name? So I told her to the best of my ability in Chinese. I said, can you write it out? I said, well, I used to could, but I don't do it every day. I'll email it to you. So I emailed it to you, and she said, oh, your name is part of a famous Chinese proverb, which is total news to me. And so I went and looked it up, and so CUN part is, when you drink water, remember the source. And I thought, wow, how prophetic, because basically, in a way, that was kind of the underlying thrust or motivation behind what I was doing. So I found that kind of fascinating. So I could give you thousands of other funny little anecdotes, but I think you get the general idea that when you get the opportunity, just go for it. I mean, I think that's one thing you can do when you're older. You don't care, you say, I just do my best, you get this opportunity, just take it. Before, I would have been maybe a little more intimidated or reluctant to take a chance to go and to do something that I might not be able to do well. But I guess I got tested by all these different experiences, and so it's been very rewarding, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
John, do you have any advice for amateur writers like us that are family historians? Okay, any tips or methodology that you could share with us?
Well, just start. That's number one. Just start somewhere. I mean, seriously, because I know too many people who procrastinate this. I'll do it tomorrow. Oh, it's too much work. But Rome wasn't built in a day. You just start writing little bits and pieces. Like, think of it as drafts of chapters or drafts of parts of chapters. At least that's the way I work. I write drafts, I do blogs, and then I later reconstitute them, and then figure out what goes well together. And I found that is a more efficient way. If you say, I'm gonna sit down and write a book, well, you're talking about 200 pages, 300 pages, and you write 10 pages after a month, oh, I'll never get there. But if you don't think of trying to do the whole mountain at once, just write whatever you think is of interest, whatever you're really excited about then. Later, you're going to revise it anyway. Later, you're going to say, oh, this is terrible. How did I write this? Yeah, seriously. Even the best of us will say, geez, how did I write this? I must have been drunk or something. So you write these little bits and pieces and save them, organize them, and then you'll be surprised later how you can reorganize them. That's what I'd say.
How long do you take to write your first?